So it started with a conversation with Shreya, our community research fellow with the accelerator who had led all of the qualitative data collection, and just kind of talking with her about what stories really stood out to her, what interviews she felt were very strong examples of the overall themes that she pulled through her data analysis. Not that any of them were like weak examples by any means, but some of them were definitely more direct. Um, and in terms of what could be translated well into language appropriate for a younger audience, not appropriate in terms of content necessarily, but just like what's discussed, the technicality of the conversation, kind of grabbable quotes that would match the themes really in an easy way where that doesn't require a ton of additional explanation or facilitation. And so I looked through some of the interviews that she suggested and started to find some really strong quotes that I felt built well off of past environmental education pieces we had created as well. So it's I was able to kind of pull in the more specific quotes that really matched the images that were coming out of what they were creating, because I gave them like several interviews each that were somewhat along these themes, these categories that Shreya had identified. And they listened to these recorded interviews, they read through the transcripts, and they took that information and created images. And when I looked at their images, there were obviously themes that struck them as outsiders to this project, and that kind of struck me as something that would be, very resonant with a general audience. So I pulled quotes kind of that spoke to those specific pieces that struck a chord with the artist as well. So it was a mix of inspiration from the qualitative researcher and the artistic interpretation that was coming forward from the illustrators. A very good portion of Lake County is Spanish speaking, close to, I think, around 20% last I checked. And knowing that we have a lot of students who are whose families are recent immigrants from Spanish speaking countries, having materials that are accessible in both English and Spanish is really vital.
I had community assets, and I had an interview where they were talking a lot about like food and how they could get like food from farms to the city and back, and trying to figure out like the best way to do that, and all while being like accessible. When I think about food being accessible is a vending machine. They're like always in places where there's not really anything else. The epitome of food being accessible would be a vending machine in my mind. It doesn't have to be like fast food or anything like that. And I was like, if we have a vending machine that like folks would be able to work with farms and like put all of like fresh food crops, all of that in a vending machine and like place them in places that people either would be a lot more accessible to, whether that's in like nature preserves or even just in like general neighborhoods. I feel like they tend to do that a lot in Japan, but we don't do that much here in terms of like hot versus cold food. Japan has like, you could get like hot drinks and stuff from a vending machine and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, so that's the idea. That's what I'm running with. And I realized as I was like searching for like vending machines that I had no idea what a vending machine looked like anymore. I rarely see them. And I was looking, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. They do look like this. So it's also just like me being like back to my childhood and be like, okay, what does vending machines look like? And where do they live? Because in my head, the last time I saw a vending machine was honestly in like a hospital. I decided I was going to draw one that was way cooler. So there's like fruits, and like you could even get like information about like the plants and that you would be around. So there's like some with the words like leaves where you would like click it and it would like either dispense seeds for you to even plant around if you wanted to, or tell you about what that plant is in the area. I just thought it was super cool. So that's that's my idea, and I like ran with it.
And this one was the first one I created, and it was based on one of the interviews that I read. But he had mentioned several times in his interview how much he enjoys just going outside to read, and how like what, like what a simple thing that is. And, just going to a park to sit on a bench and read can be so restorative and peaceful. And I just really zeroed in on that. And I saw that image of like a parent and a child reading in a park, and it seemed so doable, such a doable way to interact with nature. Dani felt like it was just like a nice image that really resonated for the same reason that, the multi-generational and that sort of just the quiet, simple thing you can do in nature you don't have to necessarily be doing a difficult hike or, rock hounding or, doing anything complicated.
This topic was a lot about transformative experiences in nature. There was a lot of interview material about kind of healing through nature, spending time in nature to kind of recenter yourself and cope with difficult times. A lot of the stories talked about dealing with COVID and finding a lot of healing by spending time out in nature. There were also people that talked about PTSD symptoms and how they connected through nature, through like gardening or meditating. And the meditation specifically, I kind of struck a chord with me because it is very much just like sitting and existing in a natural space, which is why I thought of this little mushroom friend here. And the bird on the mushroom specifically was inspired by an interview with someone that took part in a Brushwood program. And in the interview, they were saying that they kind of connected with, like displacement, being in a space that isn't yours yet necessarily, and kind of like they found a connection between that and like their own story. Kids, they see something different when they go out in nature. So I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit, where like, they don't just see like a ladybug, they see like, something fun and exciting and something that has its own story.
I think about how young people are the answer, right? And they're the way. And the more that we as older people pour into them, the more that they feel free and liberated to explore nature and be outside and not be nervous. I don't know the first thing about planting anything, right? I don't know. I struggle with keeping a succulent alive, and and it's just like I think I'm doing a good job, but then I don't know. I didn't have that exposure, and so I think about the children being that exposure. Like the more they have opportunities to be in nature, learn to grow their own food, learn to eat different kinds of food, it just impacts our health and our mental well-being and our connection to nature. And I think if we can explain like the why to kids instead of just explaining like what to do and what not to do. Like it's one thing to say like, if you eat sugar, you're going to have diabetes, right? But I at least never had this experience where they say why and like how. And so that way I can apply that. Like it used to be that I didn't do faces because I wasn't that good at them. And then people would say like, I actually like that because then I feel like I'm in the piece, right? Or I feel like I can like see myself in that image. But I think about the coloring book and how young people, kids and families will interact with it. And so this gives them the opportunity to see themselves in the artwork.
I really want them to be as creative as like I was in figuring out that a community asset is pretty much a vending machine. So I want them to think of it in their own mind, because children are super imaginative. So however they can connect it in their children imaginative mind terms is correct.
I think I would feel so great if people through this activity book were able to become aware of what's available to them in a way that they hadn't before. Or maybe felt that outdoors belong to them more than they felt before they saw the book.
I hope that that's first and foremost that they smile and they're excited about it. And I hope, kind of what I was saying before, I really hope that they can have a good time with it and really just like have fun, but also learn about topics that they might not be super familiar with, or maybe find some comfort in knowing that problems that exist for them are being acknowledged and, you know, being worked through. And hopefully that would give them some sense of comfort, or maybe even like an interest in trying to make those problems better themselves.
I hope like also gives like kids and parents and caretakers and community members like different ways of seeing art and how to use art, because I think sometimes coloring books can be seen as like juvenile, and it's like, no, actually they can serve so many other purposes. And so yeah, I hope it sparks curiosity in so many different kinds of ways.
I think in thinking about how people engage with kids, they need to remember that they're not engaging with like a different species. So to act like all children's content has to exist in kind of this like very specific framework or very specific sphere that is like kind of gutted of big concepts or like, you know, big themes that you think they're not capable of handling. Like, yeah, their cognitive processing is obviously very different at a young age, but you're introducing things and normalizing understandings of the world that can be really foundational